Chapter 15. There was something really humiliating about this, Ben thought. About how this was the second time this week someone had tried to harvest his soul. Ben reflected on this while tuning out the psycho chatter of Nemo, who was both shameless and absolutely determined to learn all of Ben's secrets. You know, before Nemo killed him or subjected him to something worse than death. Ben's face couldn't be flatter. Every muscle was relaxed and hanging loose. His eyes were half open, and so was his mouth. Nemo was completely oblivious to this and just kept talking as if nothing were wrong. The assault had gone off very well, with every gremlin holding a spine staff having been killed. So it was with an overt sense of outrage and a secret sense of being impressed that Ben watched like 7 gremlins extract themselves from the army. Ben hadn't gotten it at first, but as they painted themselves and gave congratulatory pats on the back, picking up the spine staves like they were old hat, Ben realized it. They'd hidden part of their leadership. Ben's eyes kept wandering over to a gremlin that looked visibly slower than the rest. It was strange in many ways because none of them showed any physical signs of aging, yet Ben could clearly see the difference between the young and the old simply by their behavior. The slow gremlin looked old. He moved extremely carefully. His eyes tracked things with a steady, focused gaze, and he spoke very little, while those around him spoke freely. Nemo was still chattering away, and 6 of the elder gremlins were laying out an enormous ritual circle. It differed in many ways from the ones the Greys had created, but Ben was pretty sure it would kill him no matter what. The eldest gremlin watched the proceedings with half-lidded eyes like he was barely awake. Ben felt his party stored away in the palms of his hands and wished he could tell if the slime were blocking their airways. He really hoped it wasn't. Ben tried to do pretty much anything with his utility pouch and again was blocked by Nemo, who seemed like he didn't even notice he was doing it. The eldest gremlin sat on a simple wooden chair that suggested one of 2 things to Ben. Either the gremlins were excellent craftsmen, or they stole it. Ben didn't expect to find any gremlin carpenters. The bladed slayer was still growing, except now enormous demonic wings were developing in real time right before his eyes. How extra is this thing going to get? Ben muttered, feeling absolutely terrible. It was like being at the dentist, except his mouth and face were fine, and the rest of his skin was numb. If Ben focused on it for too long, he was seriously going to freak out. He started breathing harder, the sudden thought that the numbness could spread under his skin and stop his heart or his lungs, making his heart and lungs start to work in overdrive. Adrenaline started to flow in a real way. Ben started to fidget, or at least he tried to, but couldn't. Ben would never wish this experience on anyone. The feeling of trying to move and being unable to? It was such a wretched, fearful thing. Every nerve impulse, that is, every failed nerve impulse, exponentially ramped up the panic and threatened to drive him into a frenzy. Fear is... Everyone's felt fear. Everyone's thought about it at some point or another, usually after they've been afraid. Right now, to Ben, fear was a worm in the nervous system that made him unable to move, unable to think, unable to speak, unable to feel anything but fear. Fear was paralysis. It restrained and held its victim still, and it wouldn't let go no matter what. What Ben was experiencing then was not fear, but panic. Panic differed from fear because rather than holding back, it accelerated all action beyond conscious consideration. A person in panic will do things that hurt themselves and others without the awareness they are doing so. They will do things they would not normally do. Unfortunately for Ben, that meant useless thrashing. Red sat crouched inside the darkness of the utility pocket, feeling it slowly sap away at her energy. Her body was like a prison of flesh, heavy and useless. Her eyes, though, were working just fine, and she looked out the tiny window of her open utility pocket, watching the strange being as it chattered away. To her eyes, he looked like a shadow of the void. She'd fought such creatures in the beyond, and was shocked to see one walking around. Without knowing why, she turned her attention to the brilliant, shining soul gem she still had clutched in her hand. Its light, even from inside a pocket dimension, seemed to push against the shadow being, to eat away at its darkness. She frowned, knowing it was a risk and choosing to take it anyways. She willed the stone out of the utility pocket. Ben couldn't even feel his fingers or his toes. He couldn't even wiggle them. And Nemo was still fucking talking! Or was he? Ben's panic had turned to fear, and his thrashing had ceased. In my objective estimation, his pushing through his fear, through the paralysis it poisoned him with, was nothing short of heroic. He turned his eyes and looked at the void soul, looked him right in his empty, soulless eyes. The eyes were not empty, or soulless. Nemo stared at his hands, his mouth open like he'd been talking, and suddenly stopped. "Hey," Ben croaked out, feeling his vocal cords, but not the familiar vibration on his throat. Nemo looked at him, and Ben saw something close to terror in his eyes. "Hey," Nemo said, then blinked several times and didn't say anything else. Then he swallowed and asked a question. "Am I dreaming?" Ben said no, he wasn't dreaming. "Oh, so all of this is really happening?" Then Ben said it was and called Nemo a fucking idiot. Nemo gulped again. "This has really gotten out of hand," he said, and ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't think it would be like this." Ben called Nemo an idiot again, then ordered him to get him free. Nemo, to Ben's great surprise, started to do just that. "Look, they're probably going to kill me," Nemo said. "And they're probably going to kill you too, but I think I'd rather just die here than go back to—" He shuddered. "Just be cool," Ben said, acting as normal as he could while Nemo started to covertly collect the paralytic mucus with a utility pouch set to suction. Nemo didn't even try to just be cool. He had gotten most of the slime off of Ben's upper body when he started hyperventilating. "Nemo?" Ben said through clenched teeth. "Just be fucking cool!" "Oh God, my name isn't Nemo," Not Nemo said, running his hands through his hair. "I'm Jameson, and I killed all those people," he said, his voice already elevated from whisper to normal speaking and his volume elevating. "I'm a fucking mechanic," he said, looking at his hands with wide, panicked eyes. "Oh, what have I done?" he said, while inhaling, which just sounded just like, wow, not pleasant to listen to. From that point onward, he devolved, and his volume and body language increased in intensity. Whatever paralytic agent was in the mucus, it wore off fast, and Ben started to feel sensation return to his fingers and his skin. Not enough to move, not yet, but with it came a small connection to his mana. If a normal connection could be compared to a 4-inch gas line, then the connection he had right now could be compared to a pipe the size of a human hair. But it was there, and with it, he felt his utility pocket start to react. He could feel his party, each one of them completely drained of their mana, each of them except Vivi. Nemo/Jameson was screaming and clawing at his face, saying something like, "They're inside me! They're inside me! Sweet almighty God, they're inside me!" Ben ignored him and focused on Vivi's utility pocket. He realized the problem right away. He saw what Nemo had done to lock them down and reversed it, taking exactly 0 time to try and understand the how or the why. "Vivi," Ben whispered, ready to inspire him to courage, ready to tell him to take the others and leave him behind, ready to tell him to stand and fight. Ben didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew he needed to say something. He knew he needed to say something. But the thing about Ben was, he was wrong. Vivi emerged from his utility pocket, white in the way fresh snow is white, and sparkling in the same way. His skin was tough-looking, yet soft-looking. He was larger than the gremlins. Vivi's eyes were hard, and he frowned a sluggy frown, his soft, delicate little mouth set to a snarl. Immediately, his long body curved around Ben protectively, and Vivi started talking. "Hold on tight," Vivi said, and a gremlin screamed as it stepped into a disk of annihilation. The rest of the gremlin camp started up in a frenzy and began to charge. Vivi's eyes moved in the way a human wizard would use his hands to cast a spell. The eye stalks growing incandescent like an industrial light bulb, little bolts of electricity or the magical equivalent jumping between them. The eyes extended out and then up, and first, a wall of stone rose around them. "Ring of stone!" Vivi shouted. "Blazes! Puzzle shield!" If Ben hadn't been watching for it, he would have missed the critical details. The stone wall around them was about 3 feet tall and angled on top in such a way that anyone who climbed it would have a high chance of falling inside once at the top. When Vivi cast his second spell, a translucent, nearly invisible sheet of energy surrounded them, filling the inner area of the ring of stone. It rushed towards them like water, then, at the last moment, surrounded them in a hollow sphere. "We have 2 minutes," Vivi said, "so let's make them count." A gremlin scaled the wall and slipped down the sloped top, falling into the strange shield, then vanishing. "Does that kill them?" Ben asked, strong enough now to lean up and look at Vivi with wide eyes. "No, unfortunately. It sends them to an alternative realm in which they have to solve a puzzle to escape. If they don't solve it in 2 minutes, they are ejected from the realm, and I get a portion of their remaining mana. If they solve it, they immediately exit, and are buffed to be twice as strong." "That's unnecessarily complicated," Ben said, "but I love it." "It's extremely mana efficient," Vivi said, "and the puzzle's difficulty is based on what I would find hard." Ben, at that point, realized it was a skill for people who felt like they were smarter than everyone else. "What next?" Ben asked, eyeing the lemming-like gremlins as they surged over the wall and fell into the trap. "I hope none of them succeed, and I get some mana back. I'm not expecting much because they're, gremlins, but I need whatever I can get. How long until you can get the others out?" "I'll need to supply the mana," Ben said, "and right now, I can barely move. Who do you want as backup first?" "Red," Vivi said, surprising Ben. "Then Ghost Ears, then Short Bus. Both Red and Ghost Ears have mind control type skills. And if we get out of this alive, it's because we get the monsters fighting themselves, and we get out of here before that thing," Vivi said, pointing with an eye to the bladed slayer, "cuts its way out of the cyst and starts murdering everything it can see." The sound around them was changing, and the walls that protected them blocked their vision. The screaming died down, and the rate at which the gremlins threw themselves into Blaze's puzzle shield dropped dramatically. Soon, not a sound could be heard, except the screaming of Nemo, or Jameson, whatever he called himself. It sounded like he was being restrained, and he was freaking out. "Shouldn't have taken worm blood," Ben said, feeling really, really relieved he hadn't gambled with his fate when he had the chance. Above the silence and the screaming, a voice called out with authority in a language meant for a master's tongue. It was a language of single-syllable words, simple commands for slave creatures. Jameson/Nemo started yelling as though he were being restrained, and the gremlins that had to hold him down yelled their complaints. The voice of authority started to hum, A low and sad sound that cut through clarity like a knife of thick, suffocating fog. Other gremlins joined in, and soon an eerie, witchy, goosebumpy song was sung. Ben couldn't help it. The music pierced his mind in the way music did, bypassing all defenses and making him see. He felt his crown snap on his forehead, the abused twig no longer able to handle the strain of keeping Ben's nakedness at bay. He was small, he realized, very small. If someone said he were a foot tall, he'd call them a liar. His lower body was numb, and he felt sick and cold, like he would vomit at any second. He had a headache, and his bones felt stiff and awkward inside his body. The song refused to echo. It spread like a cloud, and when Ben looked around, he saw the sheer enormity of the over-cavern forest. Trees with bases that must have been 200, 300, 400 feet thick. These things had branches larger than the largest trees remaining on Earth, and those branches had branches that were still comparable. They rose and rose and rose, taller than skyscrapers, each one of them a megastructure in their own right. Ben felt very small, and he couldn't even curl in on himself because he was paralyzed. "I'm supposed to be in Hawaii right now," he whispered, treacherous words spilling from his lips. "Oh man, I don't like this at all." Vivi looked at him, and something shifted in his gaze. "How old are you, Ben?" Vivi asked the question with a great deal of implied hesitation, like it was something he'd never even considered asking. "I'm 29, he responded. "Slime," Vivi whispered. Jameson/Nemo's screaming started to trail, then abruptly cut off. The Void Soul laughed, and it sounded awkward more than anything else. The eerie song continued. "Whoops!" he yelled. "Get off me! Get off! I'm fine! Just woke up a little too much, that's all. It was a little dude. My best friend, Finger Gun Fairy, bang bang," he said. And Ben just knew he was doing finger guns. "He got me a little too excited, that's all. I'm nice and asleep. The worms are my little buddies, isn't that right?" In response, Ben heard a skin-crawling, keening sound, like 10 billion tiny, horrible voices calling out their agreement. Then, the 10 billion tiny, horrible voices added their strength to the awful gremlin song. It just kept getting worse and worse. "Mr. Fairy!" he yelled out. "Oh, Mr. Fairy!" His voice was musical, sing-songy, and whimsical. "Would you be willing to accept a bargain? We really need— Ow, fine, fuck! We really want that soul stone back. What would you like in exchange for it?" "Ignore him," Vivi said to Ben. Then Vivi lifted Ben telekinetically and placed him between his eye stalks. "I'm prepared to agree to anything!" Nemo shouted, then started laughing. Vivi's eyes were scanning the area, ready for the moment a gremlin solved the puzzle and/or the moment the shield's effects ended. Ben's eyes were wide, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get his mind under control. "I just need," he said, his breath coming in short gasps. "I just need," he repeated. What Ben needed was to calm the fuck down, but he couldn't. His connection to his substantial mana pool was slowly widening, and with a start, he felt himself reconnect with his utility pocket. The first thing he wanted to do was pull out one of his backup crowns and immediately put it around his skull. "Vivi," Ben said, "is there enough room here for everyone else? I'm going to be able to let them out." "Wait till the shield ends. It doesn't distinguish between friend and foe," Vivi said, his eyes still scanning the area. Ben, having covered the important things, immediately equipped a backup crown directly from his utility pouch, and the effect was immediate. The tension in his body didn't leave, and he wasn't filled with a sudden surge of confidence, and there was no alteration of his mood or personality. What did happen was the crown straightened his will, amplified it to a degree that Ben was able to push past his fear and his situation and behave in the way he knew he needed to. 10 seconds, Vivi said, his voice quiet. "Feeling better, Your Majesty?" "As good as I get, Lord Slug," Ben shot back, leaning up and rinsing his body off with salt water. As Ben expected, the ocean water had no effect on Vivi, but it did wash off the rest of the numbing slime quite effectively. "I've gotta get some of that stuff," Ben said, watching the slime dissolve and run off his clean body, almost immediately regaining full feeling. 5 seconds, Vivi said, his eye stalks growing incandescent again. Ben quickly evacuated the area, dodging the dangerous-looking electrical discharge as it arced between the stalks. He was flying again, close to Vivi, but not too close. 4, 3, 2, 1. The strange, almost invisible field vanished. Simultaneously, gremlins started appearing in the order they had vanished, first into the mysterious puzzle dimension, first out of the mysterious puzzle dimension, exactly 2 minutes after they disappeared. They popped into existence like a herd of very unfortunate isekai protagonists, one right after another. The gremlins were unsteady on their feet, and Ben felt a tangible pulse of mana enter Vivi's body as each one appeared. "This almost isn't even worth it," Vivi said, a scowl on his face, referencing the meager mana he gained from his trap. "But it will have to do. Let them loose, Ben." Ben did so. 2 utility pockets opened, and a giant shark man, as well as a normal-sized Chaos Warden, appeared. They landed on their feet, and both of them immediately doubled over and started vomiting noisily, clutching their heads and groaning in pain. "Slime!" Vivi spat the curse. "They're mana-sick! Ben, how long until—" Ben doubled over and vomited, his own overtaxed mana pool finally asserting its displeasure on Ben's body. He'd been supporting the three's costs since the moment they ran out of magic, which had been fine, until he had to pay the cost of setting them loose as well. His headache turned from awful to, "I could die from this," and his stomachache turned from bad to, "My guts are going to melt." "Slimy slime!" Vivi yelled. "Okay, I guess it's just me." Shortbus held up a finger like he wanted to say something, but then he just started dry heaving. Red looked super confused, then puked up. Nobody knew what the fuck she'd been eating before being summoned into the world, but there was some strange-looking stuff mixed in with the magic peas she'd eaten earlier. Ghost Ears looked absolutely miserable, but he kept trying to draw his swords and failing. "Void and slime!" Vivi was swearing in the way most individuals do when suddenly their situation went from die to can't die, protect the helpless. He was glad his mother wasn't here to hear him swearing like this. Then the gremlins, who had all their mana stolen, tried to advance, and they started to puke as well. "This is just outrageous," Vivi said. The smell assaulted him, and it was gross. With contempt in his magic, Vivi began whipping the gremlins with air, sharp, cracking sounds filling the dark forest with each strike. The sounds of the gremlins' song faded with each whip crack, and Ben felt the insidious effects on his mind end. The voices faded, until a single ancient voice was all that was left. It was silent except for the cracks of the magic whip and the ancient gremlin singing. He trailed off and loosed a low, dark chuckle. His voice was powerful and carried meaning more effectively than words ever could. "Won't you surrender peacefully?" Nemo called out again, and more gremlins started to chuckle. "Won't you trust us? We're extremely honest." The chuckling began to grow in intensity, turning to dark laughter. "I promise I won't betray you. Nobody would betray you here." The laughter grew in intensity. "We can all be friends. We can all get along. We can build a mutually beneficial relationship." The laughter grew from merely dark to murderous, and from mere laughter to full-on hysterics. Imagine that, being doubled over with nausea, surrounded by your allies who are also doubled over in agony, with only a giant magical slug for protection. Imagine it! The sound of 1,000 evil monsters all around you, laughing at you, laughing at the things they were going to do. It was, by far, the single most terrifying moment of Ben's life thus far. The swarm of fairies above them, still hidden and watching with rapt attention, had no intention of interfering. The hit squad from Solas was minutes away, an eternity compared to how long Ben's party could hold out. Frankie was almost done, was almost ready to warp the pocket of sanctuary in and save the day, but almost wouldn't be enough. It was all up to Vivi, who crumbled under pressure, who couldn't get through a job interview to save his life, who was easily grossed out, who was a coward in his heart and boastful in his words. It was all up to Vivi. The Aeon slug steeled his nerve and found something inside of himself he didn't know was there. An energy which wasn't magic, which couldn't be turned into a skill, but which was, nonetheless, potent. He found his courage. The gremlins attacked, and Vivi defended his strange new family. Chapter 16. The monsters of the first cavern lair had already escaped, and their effects on the over-cavern forest and its surrounding lands would be felt for generations. They ran far and wide, carrying with them dungeon cores, magical weeds, living stones of mana, all sorts of treasures that were coveted and feared on the surface world, coveted because of their value and utility, feared because of their ability to increase the mana density of an area. They ran, and with them, the magic of the forest thickened and became more robust. The useful became more useful, and the harmful became more harmful. There were lots of kinds of creatures. Some solitary threats, some were invasive species, and others were opportunistic underground civilizations on a raid. Such as the Myconians, who also called themselves the Stumps. They were an odd race, and technically they were two kinds of creatures lumped together as a single species. The Myconians were humanoid mushrooms that were usually specialized for a particular purpose. Some Myconians were miners, some were laborers, some were builders, some were martial artists. For every purpose, there was a kind of humanoid mushroom. Where did they come from? Did they spring forth from mycelium in the ground and spread their spores? Well, the short answer is no. The long answer is yes, but only from the stumps. Stumps were, as advertised, enormous tree stumps. They ambled about on their roots, had faces, and liked to drink. Their personalities were generally boisterous, aggressive, and belligerent. They were one of the few species that thrived in the caverns, or at least one of the few intelligent non-monster civilizations that thrived in the caverns. Stumps were uniquely blessed with the ability to spawn a loyal workforce by growing Myconians from their mycelium-animated bodies. Scholars have long debated whether Myconians and Stumps were technically necromancy, parasites, or something else entirely. The creatures in question didn't care one way or the other what the Enalim debated in their College of Eternal Life in Exitus. Stumps didn't really give a fuck what anyone thought about them, if we're on the topic. They were famously secure in their identities, and nothing and nobody was going to tell them being a slimy, gigantic, rotten stump with big, bulging mycelium eyeballs and a comically huge mouth, walking around on big, old, rigid root tentacles was anything short of the best thing ever. The local stump population had happened to be close by when the opening to the underground had appeared, and they intended to take full advantage of it. They were felling as many gigantic trees as they could and hauling the wood underground. There was nothing stumps and Myconians loved more than making new stumps and Myconians, and they needed actual tree stumps to make that happen. Thus, their invasion of the surface. It was led personally by two stumps, Bilge Breath and Black Spit, who were just great guys. Really personable. Very enthusiastic.
"Ah, put your backs into it!"
Bilge Breath shouted, spittle and wetness flying everywhere as the pool of fermenting everything in his mouth was sprayed with every word. Black, slimy drool ran between his large, splinter teeth, and he chuckled, spraying more gack in the process. The Myconians, for their part, were very clean creatures. They were intelligent, but they also couldn't speak, nor did they want to, so everybody always overlooked them. Their bodies were white in the way only mushrooms were white, and their bodies were all thick stalk. Atop their heads were caps of green, and the ends of their hands, for this particular species at least, were hardened, organic axe blades. There were about 100 of them working on an enormous tree, which would yield a particularly fine stump.
"Why don't we come up here more often?"
Black Spit asked, his voice also sounding like someone with too much spit in their mouths. He sprayed foul, stinking fluid with every word.
"Monsters, usually,"
Bilge Breath replied, slurring his words. It's safe to assume that all stumps are slurring their words like all the time. That's just how they talked. In a loud, spray-it-don't-say-it, projectile spit slur of words.
"All right, the monsters,"
Black Spit said, then burped, spraying a bunch of yuck all over Bilge Breath, who laughed, then burped and sprayed a bunch all over Black Spit. It's worth noting that stumps were generally avoided in polite company and never invited to any kind of formal gathering. Who could stand to be around them? They were loud, direct, impolite, always goofing around, and they smelled like rotten death. Like some animal that had died out in a field and was half rotted. A happy dog barked and started rolling around in the filth. It was, under the caked-on grime, a chow-chow/collie mix. He had golden red, floofy-ass fur and upright, naturally triangular ears. The fur around his head was so fluffy, it looked like the world's cutest lion's mane. He was from Earth, and had taken the bright spark as his plus perk, as had most animals. Not all animals, but most of them. His name was Lewis, and he was a traveling trader. He finished rolling around in the disgusting, disgusting pile and shook the excess off.
"Smells great,"
he happily projected with his mind, heard by his companions.
"This is great." "Oh, Lewis, you're the best company we've ever had,"
Bilge Breath said, and affectionately scratched Lewis behind the ear.
"But you're gonna need a bath. You smell worse than me,"
he shouted, and Lewis immediately reacted to the word bath like every pet dog reacted to the word. His ears went back, his tail went between his legs, his eyes got really, really big, and he shrunk away from Bilge Breath.
"No thanks, no bath,"
Lewis said, then started running around, happy the subject was closed. The dog ran with a spring in his step, his fur bounced, his tail was thick and fluffy, and he had an extremely expressive face. Lewis remembered, with vivid, perfect memory, how humans and children reacted to him, and he knew, without a doubt, that he was a good boy.
How many?
The traveling trader asked, referencing how many Myconians the stumps were willing to give him to be his escort and labor force when he set out for Solas.
10,000,
Bilge Breath shouted.
100,000,
Black Spit countered, and then the two of them began a back and forth where they added zeros to their numbers.
100 trillion Marconians,
Bilge Breath said, and then Black Spit spat.
"Oh, I can't pump that many out! 100 trillion it is!" he said.
"Too many," Lewis said, then started running in figure eights between the two stumps. 20 is good. 20? 25?
1,000?
No, 5 5s, 25, Lewis said, and the two stumps exchanged a glance.
That's terrible,
Black Spit slurred.
but be sure to keep our list in mind. We're banned from the city after the last incident. Bah! They're a bunch of prissy little queens,
Bilge Breath said.
Can't handle the smell. Oh, let's scuttle. That tree's coming down. Timber!
Timber! Black Spit and Lewis said at once, and Lewis started barking in an excited, doggy way. His barks were less ruh, 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 and more roo, 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 roo. The massive city-building-sized tree was felled and crashed to the ground with a massive thud. The underground army of night fiends jumped and were stilled by their commander. They would emerge soon enough, once the mana density had stabilized.
That right there's a big stump,
Black Spit slur spat, drooling and eyeing the enormous tree base in a lecherous, salacious, hungry way. He looked at it in a way that only stumps could look at a tree stump, which is to say, how Sir Mix-a-Lot looks at a badunkadonk big old booty. If you don't get the reference, a song link is provided in the post comments. Oh, he'll be a stump for sure. Could even be a stump lord. Oh, ha, ha, ha. Let's dig him out and drag him down. Forget the tree. This was totally worth it.
Everybody's gonna be so happy to see this! Hey, forget the wood! Start digging the stump out! Careful on his roots! You might be looking at royalty! Can you imagine it? A stump lord!
The Myconians stopped their processing of the massive tree with some reluctance. They'd been looking forward to some fresh wood to eat, but orders were orders. From some nearby bushes, the hit squad from Solas watched with wide eyes, conferred with one another, then decided it wasn't worth the time to try and make contact with the stumps. They had a job to do, after all. And according to the system custodian, they were very close. The fairy swarm up in the canopy watched with rapt, excited eyes as the Aeon Slug pushed back gremlins with whips of magic and fire, driving them off and slaying them whenever they approached. He shot arrows of magic, opened discs of annihilation. He raised walls of stone and sunk parts of the battlefield into pits from which escape did not easily come. He was different than the other Aeon slugs the fairies had seen and tormented in the over-cavern forest. He shone with a light that seemed to torture the gremlins, a light that fascinated the fairies and made them want to inch closer and closer. More than the light, he was fighting rather than running away. And even more than that, he was defending people. He was like a hero or something. They watched and got nearer and nearer to the action, hardly even realizing they were being drawn into the story, being drawn into a fight in which they had no real stake. But then again, they were fairies. They thrived on intruding, then delighted in interrupting, and they felt most comfortable where they were least welcome. One of them broke the silence and started giggling. It was unlike the giggles of the greater races, unlike the laughter of every other species, because the giggles of wild fairies were a language as much as they were an expression of excitement. The giggle meant one single thing and asked a single question. Fun? Another fairy giggled, repeating the question. The laughter spread, and soon it turned from a question into a statement. Then it turned from a statement to an exclamation of intent, because the fairy swarm had decided they were going to have some fun at someone else's expense, which was just exactly how they liked it. Chapter 17. Vivi held back the night. He was tired, his mana pool was numb, his heart was wrung dry of emotion, and he didn't know how he was even still awake. yet his will still whispered, "Hold on." He held on because if Vivi, that coward, ran, others would die. Again. He ran when the ritual went wrong all those years ago. He saved himself, and the others were rendered impossible, wiped from the universe. He had to run, he told himself. He had to. Otherwise, the rift could have grown and become uncontrollable. He knew the truth, though, that he had run because he was terrified. He was terrified now, and even now he still felt that voice in his mind telling him to flee, telling him that he could still save himself. Vivi always listened to that voice. His entire life, that voice kept him safe, yet it also kept him alone. He'd been alone a long time listening to his fear, to his wisdom, and he couldn't stand it any longer. Better to die here than suffer an eternity of life, an eternity of running away and abandoning people in need. Better to have lived a short life of meaning than experience eternal emptiness. The gremlins had formed a torus around their position, a thick ring with a hole in the center. Their formation would look like a donut to a hungry person. They were methodical in their attack. Those that could do magic did so to the exclusive effect of keeping their enemies contained. Those who could fight rushed forward, always charging when Vivi's back was turned. Those who could neither fight nor do magic sung a gremlin song, which in this event had both the energy and speed of Making Christmas from Nightmare Before Christmas, but only the annoying and frightening parts. All the while, the eldest gremlin of the over-cavern forest held back his claws, held back his magic, held back his song, and watched with patient, cautious eyes. He knew what a prize he'd stumbled on. Not one, but 2 Quasar souls had wandered into his furry clutches. Above them, the bladed slayer began to kick and heave inside of its yoke, its eyes fluttering like someone caught in a dream. The monstrosity had to have been 150 feet tall, and it was waking up. The eldest gremlin watched it, then spat, because he was completely out of time. He put 2 fingers into his mouth, avoiding his jutting lower teeth, and whistled. Other elders who had been hidden in the crowd revealed themselves and rushed towards their leader. Vivi, watching this, sent an earthen spike at them, but the spell was intercepted. All the while, Ben's world was confined to sight that was white static, and sensation which was only pain. He kept trying to get up, but fell back down with each effort. Forget about flying. He was like a big, clumsy male ant crawling on the ground, waiting to get picked up by drones, have his wings cut off and be used by the queen to spawn. Ben's brain clenched, and he screamed in agony. He needed to black out, but he couldn't even rest. Short Bus was unaccustomed to being bothered by pain as a general concept. Sharks don't have much use for it in the ocean, and his experience with pain thus far left him feeling superior and above such puny inconveniences. In this moment, he was learning what every other creature knew. Pain was the worst. The massive shark man screamed, his voice both physical and psychic, sending a fresh wave of agony through the mana-stricken party and disrupting everyone else for a moment. Ghost Ears had just straight up gone blind and numb. He was the only member of the party to have any sense of relief out of this mess. His senses would come back with his mana, but for now he was paralyzed and laying on the ground with blind eyes. Red? Now she was in the same pain as everyone else, but the thing about Red was, this was nothing new. Before being plucked from the beyond, she had spent eternity, like from deep cosmic night to the current cosmic sunrise, on the battlefields of forever, the warring ground where possible futures fought it out to be expressed. She was no stranger to this situation. Even though it was her first time experiencing it in such vivid and exquisite detail. The pain meant nothing to her, and in truth, it was just another sensation she wanted to explore. What mattered was her inability to move, and what mattered even more than that was killing the gremlins. She turned her antlered head to face a dead gremlin and wrinkled her nose in disgust. She had no time to contemplate what it meant, to contemplate her new role in the eternal war against chaos or the unique position she found herself in. She had no time to revel in the sheer physicality of her new nature as much as she would have liked to. Instead, she only had time for this. She extended a shaky, weak arm, her eyes of energy dim from her lack of magic, her own natural powers suppressed by the gremlin's song. Instead, she used the ability which the system had gifted her, the ability which he claimed was equal to levels and classes and skills. "System looting," she said in her deep, hoarse voice, and options became available in her mind. They didn't need a sword, or a neatly bundled gremlin pelt, or raw gremlin steaks, or any of the other numerous ways the corpse could be transformed. What they needed was what they got. The gremlin's body dissolved into nothing, and left in its place was a paper star standing on 2 points. It was deep blue, almost purple, and would always appear to be facing whoever was looking at it. Red snarled when she saw it was out of reach, and part crawled, part dragged herself towards the new item. To her, it felt like an eternity, but in reality it only took a few seconds. She cried out, her new abdominal muscles yelping in agony as she extended herself out, her fingertips just barely able to brush against the innocent-looking paper star, and the second she did, the pain lessened dramatically. She gasped, her eyes of energy brightening visibly and fluttering like she was blinking. 5 seconds, she realized. 5 seconds was the cooldown on her only skill. "Vivi, hold the line," Red said, her voice husky as she got up on shaky legs. "Help is on the way." She dragged a gremlin corpse over to Short Bus and looted it, transforming it into another blue star of mana which fell directly onto the Shark Man. His eyes fluttered open and he stood on unsteady legs. He looked Red dead in the eyes and knew she had saved his life, possibly all their lives, and said nothing that didn't need to be said. He knew, and she knew. A bond had been formed. Short Bus ran to back up a grateful, weeping Vivi. He also started urinating as he ran and shouted, "For Ben!" then fired off an anima blast. The gremlins caught in it were not paralyzed or stricken insane, but rather they were amplified. All rational, conscious thought was banished, and they started just doing whatever the hell they wanted to do at that very moment. Some gremlins sat down to eat, others ran away in fear, some started fighting their rivals, and others just stood around with dumb expressions on their faces. Red revived Ghost Ears in the same way, the plentiful gremlin corpses around them serving as fodder for her ability. Ghost Ears gave Red the same look of respect, one warrior to another, and went to join the fight. Finally, she found Ben, still trying in vain to get up, and still failing. She looted a nearby gremlin and picked Ben up. The sensation of holding him in her hand was very strange, and she didn't care for it. Her hands had done too much violence to feel comfortable holding a life in them. "Lords of the Beyond," she whispered, her mind in another faraway world. "What has happened to your people? What terrible plot has laid humanity?" She said a different word for humanity, one not easily written or pronounced. "So low." She placed him next to the star, close enough that he could reach it, but not so close that he would be guaranteed to find it. Then, in a twist of cruel dispassion, she looted another gremlin, this time producing a simple ring of iron too small to fit around a finger, but just the right size to rest upon the brow of a fairy prince. She put the crown in the opposite direction as the mana star and left Ben in the middle. She had seen how he depended upon the crown on his head, and how he had crumbled without it. Such things were obvious to her eyes. Red leaned down, her lips larger than Ben's head, yet she nonetheless whispered in his ear, "Choose." Then she got up to join the fight. Red had many names on the battlefield, given by allies and enemies alike, but none of them had been flattering. She was the greatest of servants to the strong and a scourge upon the weak, drawing blood as she rooted out the unworthy from her own army. None counted her as a friend, for fear of what she would do to make them great, for the terror of the knowledge of how far she would let them fall. She had walked countless battlefields and arranged an endless number of scenes just like the one she left behind now. And with her numinous eyes, she had witnessed both triumph and failure. But it was she who chose who to test, and she who both destroyed the future and created it. The armies which opposed the eternal forces of chaos were strong because of her. They knew it to be true, but none could claim across the eternal war to not have lost a friend to the cruel machinations of Red. She weeded the army, looking for any who could not pull their weight, any who would be a liability, and gave them opportunities to become strong, however hateful the opportunities could seem. They had called her the daughter of chaos, for she had been born of it and rejected it as unworthy. She gave herself, body and soul, only to the future which could endure, to the future which was superior to all others, to the future which was inevitable and eternal. In her eyes, at least. In not so many words, Red was a difficult kind of friend to have. Ben was on his knees, heaving and oblivious to the world. Here's what he saw. Dry dirt, the grains too large for his sensibilities, stains of wet on the ground from vomit and from him once again pissing himself. His arms were straight, elbows locked, pale white and hairy, and his palms were against the moist dirt with fingers spread all the way out. His knees were sunk in just a bit in the mud he'd created, and his feet were sunk almost to his ankles. Garish pink and purple wings, more magnificent and beautiful than ever thanks to his recent evolution, lightly pressed their weight against his back. He'd never taken a good look at how they were attached to him and never intended to. The act would make them too real, too a part of him. This is not what I am, he thought. Battle raged around him as he stared in the dirt, but all his ears could hear was ringing from his own head. Ah! Ben's stomach clenched again, and he felt pain so intense he saw white. Nothing came up, but his mouth still opened as wide as it could, and he heaved, saliva falling from his mouth like drops of water on the damp dirt. All of this was happening, yes, and it consumed 99.9% of Ben's brain. But 0.1% of him was watching it all very calmly, in a completely detached manner. Ben took refuge in detachment and felt a real lucidity wash over him. His body was doing its thing, Ben couldn't stop that, but he didn't have to participate for the moment. This isn't who I am, Ben thought. His thoughts turned to his life before, to the sensible adult job he'd been working, the sensible adult career path he'd charted out and poured his energy into pursuing, to his apartment, which was always about 65% clean, his old computer, his old chair, his old bed, his old life. That's not who I am either, he thought. His thoughts turned to his commute to work and how he'd loved watching the sunrise in late spring as he drove to his job. He remembered that regular, twice-daily, 30-minute period of time in which his mind went wild. Oh, the things he had thought on those drives! Ideas that could have saved the world. Ideas that could have made any man rich. Ideas of such profound meaning they made him weep. He remembered playing video games as a kid and watching anime and reading stories and feeling them resonate with something deep, deep in his soul. Resonate with the shared mental heritage all humans are unworthy heirs to. That, Ben thought. That is who I am. System update. You have advanced error. Ben felt the system updating inside of him and he cast it aside. He didn't need it to tell him what he already knew. He felt his racial trait, evolution, activate. Ben sat in a rare lotus of perfect mental control, a state which can be sought for a lifetime and never achieved, a state which can be achieved but never mastered, a state which humans both covet and fear. He was at the center of his being, with no illusions of what he was or who he was. Ben saw the skills, saw his levels, saw the entire system of magic that suffused his being and assisted him. In his state of heightened awareness, it was still magical gibberish, and he felt a thrill of excitement that even at his best, even if he tried his hardest, that some things were completely beyond him. The evolution trait flashed, and Ben dispassionately interacted with it, then activated it. He watched as the system stripped away the power of his levels and felt his body. The pain lessened. His focus was interrupted. And he was him again, and Ben tried to hold on to the memories, but they slipped through his fingers like water or sand and faded to wherever dreams go when they die. He'd been on the cusp of enlightenment. "Fuck!" Ben shouted, then blinked several times because the dirt was wrong. He clenched some in his hands, looking for the mud, but all he saw was a small puddle somewhere under his stomach. Ben shook his body, the lack of pain feeling almost alien. Something was wrong, and he shook his body again. His back. His wings! Ben felt around and started laughing because his back was smooth, no wings to be found. "Yes!" Ben shouted, jumping up and running to join the fight. "I'm regular-sized again! I'm a human being!" Then Ben stopped, looked around, and realized he was not regular-sized. He was bigger, but not regular-sized. Quick mental calculations put him somewhere around 2.5 and 3 feet tall. He was still completely naked. System update. You have forcibly activated the evolution racial trait via redacted means. Congratulations. It's always fun to watch people circumvent the rules. You have lost many of your skills. You have lost the racial trait flight. You have lost the racial trait extremely tiny. You have gained the racial trait small. You have gained the racial trait kinetic leap. You have gained the racial trait impact immunity. You are now classified as a Tier 1 species, Leap-Recon human. Ben held back an explosive tirade of expletives, as well as the totally non-system-related urge to start doing an Irish jig. "A fucking leprechaun! What the fuck? Never mind! Fuck this, fuck that, fuck everything! Oh, is that a crown?" Ben, to his own absolute indifference, was already playing into the leprechaun joke and using an Irish accent. He skipped over to the crown and examined it. It was too small. Then it grew larger for some reason, so he put it on his head and felt his mental state accelerate. "Oh, that's the ticket, laddie," Ben said to himself in an almost musical way. "That's the fucking ticket," he said again. Then saw the little purple star and picked that up as well. His mana pool, which was still near empty, filled about 15%, which was pretty awesome, all things considered. "I need a little green outfit," Ben said idly to himself, then really looked around and remembered he was in the middle of a fucking battle. "No, I need some fucking Ritalin," Ben said, then rushed over to Vivi, who was sagging gratefully behind Short Bus, who was acting as tank for the group and giving everyone a chance to figure out what to do next. "Ben's here!" Vivi said, sounding loopy and exhausted. "Hey, big guy! Oh, you're a big guy now! Woohoo!" Vivi said, then started laughing, well, more like giggling to himself. Red turned to face Ben and gave him a brief, mysterious smile before her face turned serious and she started to brief him. "Vivi's exhausted. Ghost Ears has been abducted by a swarm of wild fairies. Short Bus isn't going to be able to hold out for long, and my power is neutralized until someone puts a stop to all this singing." "Awesome," Ben said, and nodded his head. "Awesome!" Vivi shouted, his eyes rapidly fluttering as he seemed to fall asleep then wake up again. You have a plan? Nope, Ben said, then sighted the swarm of fairies up in the canopy of trees, the sight of which put a scowl on his face. I'll be right back, Ben said, then bent at the knees and jumped. Like, holy shit, Hulk jumped. Ben shot up like he'd just casually shaken the effects of gravity off like a dog shaking water after a bath. He shot up like him and Gravity had just had an explosive breakup and they weren't going to be boyfriend and girlfriend anymore. He shot up like a bullet. If a bullet was propelled by a bubble of inertia or magnetism or anti-gravity or something. Ben hit the canopy hard. The entire branch shook violently. The impact should have killed him. It should have turned his bones to powder and shot his liquefied flesh off at 1,000,000 miles an hour into the leaves like the world's worst experience at SeaWorld. It did not harm him in the slightest. The fairies who had surrounded Ghost Ears and were tormenting him by not letting him leave and get to the battle below took a second to realize that someone who had previously been down there was now currently up here. There was a dull second of non-reaction. Then one of them belatedly screamed and pointed. Ben eyed the fairies with a malicious royal glint in his eyes. They were much smaller than him now, about the size of a small mouse to a large cat. Ben felt himself effortlessly clinging upside down to the tree-sized branch, crouched and coiled to spring forward. Ben smiled like a cat looking at an innocent family of rats it's uncovered and was about to play with. Hello? The screaming spread, and Ben jumped again, this time straight through their swarm, missing Ghost Ears. Ben was moving too fast to really take in the details, but fairies got hurt. Fast as could be, he impacted against a nearby tree and instantly repeated the process, this time taking a moment to slap one of them on the way. Fairies got hurt again. Ben did it a third time, and fairies started to think this really wasn't a fun game at all because they were going to start dying at this rate. They started to flee, but faster than they could believe, Ben was in front of the swarm again, with that same expression of joyous, predatory aggression on his face. His crown started to grow hot, the iron ring turning red, but the heat could never burn him. Shimmering waves of heat rose from his head, his eyes sharp and glinty. "You all belong to me now," he proclaimed, and they cried out in terror because they knew it to be true. Ben pointed at the singing gremlins with force in his hand and spoke again. "Go and shut those idiots up! Now!" The fairies rushed down in a frenzy of fear and anger, unable to disobey. Ghost Ears looked at Ben with a mixture of pure hatred and awe. "I've spent my entire life," he said, looking at the red-hot crown on Ben's brow. "My entire life trying to get little assholes like them to follow orders. Apparently, all I needed was a fucking crown!" Ghost Ears shouted. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ben asked. "No, I don't want to fucking talk about it!" Ghost Ears shouted, then flew towards the fight, swearing up a storm. It might have been a tactically unwise decision, but Ben let him actually get to his destination before he launched himself at the ground. Otherwise, Ben would have beaten Ghost Ears there, and Ben was pretty sure the true elf fairy wouldn't ever forgive him if he did that. "I'm gonna hire that guy," Ben said for the second time in his life, then jumped into the final phase of the battle. Chapter 18. Nemo was a smart man, which is why he'd started running away the second he could get away with it. His opportunity had come almost immediately after the elder gremlins had fixed him. At that moment, they expected him to express his gratitude for the help and fight for them. He wasn't imagining the look of both rage and approval when he immediately betrayed them, created a massive distraction with his utility pocket, and ran away. Gremlins, particularly elder gremlins, respected the instinct for self-preservation as sacred, and each and every one of them had performed the same kind of maneuver many times in their long lives. Why had he run? Well, first and foremost, he was a human being, and he recognized a heroic last stand when he saw one. Fuck that noise. Humans were absolutely nuts when they were cornered. Second, he'd returned to consciousness without meaning to, and he suspected his contact with the fairy dude was the reason. He did not need to experience any of his existence right now, especially with the worm blood perk he'd gotten. The worms keened, sensing that Nemo was thinking about them. Nemo didn't give a shit. He didn't have any consciousness to experience the horrifying sensation with, and he was extremely happy about that. Third, he was totally bored of gremlins, and didn't want to be around when the giant blade demon was born. He had the feeling that it was going to kill its creators, then everyone else for as long as it could. Nemo intended to be out of the path of carnage. He ran like a video game character, heedless of exhaustion or physical pain, monitoring only an intangible stamina bar which determined the can and cannot run ability of the body. In many ways, being a void soul was an absolute bargain of an ability, which is why Jameson had chosen it. It was total efficiency of action and behavior, divorced from any kind of feelings about what was being done. His not mind considered for a moment the void souls who had selected the ever-piercing eye as their plus perk, and he suppressed a thrill that could have woken him up. Oh, the things they would do. Being a void soul was like being in a dream. Like being in a completely vivid, solid dream. It was like all the parts of a dream a person remembered, all the context for the dream that they didn't actually remember. Just like a dream, he could and did wake up occasionally, and right now, reality was a nightmare. He fully intended to stop being a void soul at some point. The system had assured him over and over that it was possible. He was just waiting for the right moment, for the right power and advantage to fall in his lap. Then, "Hello!" Nemo called out, seeing a group of weird-looking magical aliens moving through the forest. There was a woman made of orange glass, something that was obviously a floating robot of some kind, a trippy thing, and a big man partially made out of solid gold blocks. The big man had a little party hat on and was holding a small present box. Nemo, characteristic of all void souls everywhere, couldn't possibly give less of a shit about their well-being. "Who goes there?" the robot asked, its voice surprisingly non-synthesized. "I'm Nemo. It means nobody and meaningless. Hey, are you guys monsters?" "No, we kill the monsters." It was the crystal girl this time, and she sounded like a teenage girl. Bratty was a strong word, and so was self-absorbed, She sounded very much like a teenage girl, and I'll leave it at that. "That's great! There's a bunch of monsters back there!" Nemo pointed with his thumb. "You should distract them so I can get away! They're little brown furry dudes, 636 of them, as well as..." Nemo then amazed everyone but the robot by giving an exact force composition of the gremlins, including the bladed slayer. His numbers, I might add, were exactly correct. Void souls had perfect memory, a big selling point for that lifestyle. "Anna," the trippy double ice cream cone being whispered. His voice sounded like a synthesized electric guitar, like how they did in the 60s and 70s. "That's a lot of gremlins." "No shit, it's a lot of gremlins," Anna snapped. "You, nobody or whatever. Was that all the monsters?" "No!" Nemo helpfully said, then started listing all the monsters he'd personally witnessed being pulled from the beyond. None of the adventuring party had any blood to drain from their faces, but boy oh boy did the blood drain from their faces. "You're saying fucking gremlins are opening beyond gates?" Anna asked, her mouth foul, her attitude toxic, and her adventurer cred impeccable. "What about an Aeon slug? A big slug, you know? Have you seen one of those around?" "Oh yeah! He's trying to stop the gremlins from opening a big boing boing gate with a Quasar-class soul gem." Nemo had been goofing around, sounding playful when he said a big boing boing gate, but abruptly shifted his body language and tone to dead serious when he mentioned the soul gem. Even in his fallen state, he recognized the sheer danger of what the gremlins had been trying to do, and would have put a stop to it himself, if he could have done so without taking on any risk to himself. 31, Anna said, talking to the robot. Is this creep lying? No, 31 said, his voice sounding terrified. He's telling the truth. I'm sending out a Priority 1 emergency message now. Do you authorize the cost? Yes, I authorize the fucking cost! Are you fucking high? Hurry! Anna snapped. Great, Nemo said. Then, in his twisted, morally empty mind, he came upon an idea. Oh, also, that giant slug you mentioned is in the middle of the gremlin camp along with a bunch of other heroic types. They're fighting for their lives right now and probably need some help. Bye! Then, before Anna could grab him, Nemo set off running, humming to himself. Never hurt to try and rebuild some burned bridges. Ben looked like the stupid, forgiving type, and Nemo didn't need enemies like that right now. He was headed to Solas, and he suspected Ben was as well. The system in charge of Ben replayed the logs of him entering a state of pseudo-divinity and interacting directly with the world's magic. The system sniffed, snorted up a bit of snot, then spat it on the ground. I need a drink, he declared, and got up from his desk. At that exact moment, the version of the system in charge of Frankie got a message that the utility pocket elemental had succeeded in modifying his pocket of sanctuary skill, and then that version of the system also needed a drink. Every instance of the system was separated. They each occupied a cube of space, and that was perfectly fine. Ben's version of the system approached the wall of his cubicle and waved a hand. Immediately, a hallway formed which led to a newly created room, which all instances of the system had access to. It was a break room, like the many that could be found in any office building all over Earth. There was a water cooler, couches, a full bar, massage chairs. Okay, it was way nicer than most break rooms. It was like an executive break room. Behind the bar was an instance of the system who looked like the devil, but who wasn't the devil. The bartender was dressed sharply and was cleaning a glass. He hadn't existed 5 minutes ago, but that was perfectly fine with him. Ben's system sat down and put his horned head on the bar face down. Something strong, he said, and the bartender nodded and started mixing something up. Ben's system heard a heavy thud next to him, and then met Frankie's system. I'll have what he's having, Frankie's system said. There was another heavy thud, and another exhausted system sat at the bar. I'll have what they're having, he said. The process repeated until the bar was full. Everything was quiet, except for the clinking of glasses and the sounds of drinks being mixed. Finally, one of them broke the silence. Humans, he muttered, and the floodgates opened. Somewhere else, far away from the break room, the system began responding to needs that had just been created, and an ironically named human relations appeared from nowhere, filled with highly trained staff prepared to deal with issues as they came up. Such as 2 instances of the system getting in a fistfight in the break room. Somewhere else, a new office formed, and a system executive was born. He immediately groaned and realized he'd made a terrible mistake in emulating the human design of an office building. He tried to take it back, but all his other instances were having too much fun, and he needed a unanimous vote to reverse the increasingly chaotic cascade of changes that were occurring. Humans, the executive said, then ordered a drink. The same drink everyone else was having, I might add. Chapter 19. From Ben's point of view, they were winning. Vivi had been fortified by the consumable mana stars Red was able to create from corpses, and he had in turn fortified their position even further. Ben had wanted taller walls, but Red had screamed at Vivi, actually screamed at him, to not make the walls taller, but to tear up the terrain around them. The ground around the increasingly worn ring of stone was now dipped and torn, uneven to the extreme. Gremlins could no longer charge their position at will, and instead needed to navigate carefully to approach. They tripped and stumbled all the way to their deaths. Vivi's main job was now to continually maul the ground around them and maintain their fortified position. Ghost Ears was flying around inside the protective bubble of a fairy swarm, barking orders which were gleefully followed. His main task had been to keep the gremlins from singing and to disable their leadership, and he was succeeding at both tasks. His abilities as a dreamer were hard to define at times, but his ability to touch someone and put them to sleep or put them into a waking dream was proving itself to be remarkably effective. More than a few gremlins were running around their formation in a nightmare, attacking their allies and causing chaos. Shortbus, who would never admit to being exhausted, was on guard duty. His simple task was to defend their fortified position and take out any gremlins that made it over the walls. He loved his job, which was mainly defending Vivi and Red, as the two of them filled support roles. Red's eyes were out and about and wreaking havoc. One eye loomed high over the battlefield, simultaneously increasing the awareness of the party and decreasing the awareness of their enemies. The gremlins felt as if a fog had come over the area, felt disconnected from their group, felt as though they were going blind. Ben's party, however, felt as though everything had gained a degree of transparency, like they could see through solid objects and view everything clearly. They knew where the rest of their party was, with a degree of awareness that bordered on, and actually was, supernatural. That was her first eye. Her second eye was flying around the battlefield like an orb of evil energy and brutalizing gremlins. It would find one that was alone and isolated and get right in their faces, forcing eye contact. The eye would then start to afflict the gremlin's mind with as many mental afflictions as it could. Gremlins ran away afflicted by terror. They ran screaming and attacked anyone in their way. Afflicted by berserk, they ran at anything that moved and brutally attacked. Afflicted by madness, the effects were varied, but not a single one of them was an effective combatant after that. Afflicted by nil, those gremlins just fell to their knees and stopped fighting because what was the point? Afflicted by anything and everything that could go wrong with a mind. Red's eye loomed enormous in front of a gremlin and exploited every weakness, attacked every doubt, and amplified every discord present in their mental structure to devastating effect. All the while, Red cleared their fortified position of corpses and transformed them into a stock of paper hearts, mana stars, and green stamina orbs. The effects of the consumables weren't individually strong, but there were a lot of dead gremlins around, and Red's skill cost nothing to use and had a 5-second cooldown. Finally, there was Ben. He had no idea how a leprechaun was supposed to fight, let alone how a leprechaun with a utility pocket was supposed to fight. What he did know was that he had an inventory full of hastily sharpened sticks and the ability to leap from gremlin face to gremlin face, Superman style, and punch them with his surprisingly durable fists. Which is exactly what Ben was doing. To imagine this properly, just picture it. A sea of red, bulging eyeballs and jutting lower jaw canines, hundreds of monsters twice his height, their bodies covered in stiff brown fur, their disposition towards him one of complete hatred. Then there was Ben, standing on top of the ring of stone, aiming for a gremlin who looked like he was daydreaming and leaping at him. Ben's flight trajectory was a straight line, a real straight line, unaffected by the pull of gravity. A gremlin face, which had once been small, became very large, very fast, and soon was yelling in pain as Ben's tiny fist impacted against it. The gremlin went to knock Ben off, but every time his hands swatted toward him, a utility pocket would open, and a sharpened stick would stab at the hand. Ben then repeated the process, targeting another distant gremlin and knocking it out cold. They fell to the ground, and Ben jumped straight up into the canopy, then straight down, and kicked a gremlin in the back of the head. There was a disturbing snap, and Ben was pretty sure he'd killed him. There wasn't time to think about it, because a gremlin holding an axe swung it at him, and Ben had to think about his own life rather than the life he'd just taken. Ben was familiar with the feeling that had overtaken him. It was as though his problem-solving brain had gone into overdrive. The problems were simple. Someone is swinging an axe at me, and the solutions were also simple. Jump to the side, and then shove a stick under its ribs, pull the stick out, and flee. Problem? Violence. Solution? Greater violence. It was as though the human brain had been designed to solve this single problem, and everything else humanity did with it was a hack, like emulating a smartphone on a PC. That distant, detached part of Ben noted with dispassion that he wasn't even scared. He was actually excited and interested in what was going on around him. Every little detail sparking off huge trains of analysis in his mind. Everything had a degree of novelty to it, which was absent in regular life. Or, to put it another way, every shadow of boredom had been banished from his mind. In Ben's mind, they were winning. In Red's experienced professional opinion, they were not winning. There were just too many monsters for them to deal with. They were on the losing end of a stalemate, and what was worse, the gremlins were adapting to their tactics. She would occasionally see a gremlin poke its head over the top of the wall, rather than blindly charge in, and then retreat. She prioritized killing those gremlins above all others. She was not always successful. By now, the elders knew how the party was sustaining itself and had already dramatically lessened the number of gremlins charging over the walls in response. Instead, they were taking blind pot shots with their bows and hauling dirt to create a stable path to the walls. Red could already see how their tactic was going to play out. They would wear out the defenders with arrows, keep them occupied while they finished their road, and then break a hole in their wall. After that, they would pour through like a flood and wash them away. Red's nose scrunched and she bared her teeth at the thought. The elders, the ones they needed to defeat, were crafty and wily. It quickly became obvious to Red that the elders were hiding amongst their spawn and creating decoys to divert the party's attention. She wondered if they had killed even a single one of their leaders. She had to believe that they had, but how could they know? "Boy, those gremlins sure are tricky," Shortbus said casually, his already impressive endurance fortified by the green stamina orbs. "Yes," Red said, not sure if she was asking a question or just spouting a meaningless response. "Yeah, it's super tricky. It's a shame I can see their brains and smell the difference between them all," Shortbus said casually, then did something extremely violent to a gremlin and tossed the resulting 2 pieces over the wall. "You can?" "Oh yeah, I can see inside of brains, you know. Your brain is a little funny," Shortbus said, briefly allowing menace to enter his voice. "But I think you're all right." "Hang on," he said, then grabbed a fleeing gremlin by the foot and whipped him against something hard, then tossed that body over the wall as well, in the same direction he'd thrown the last one. No more gremlins were coming over the walls, but more arrows than ever were flying towards them. Vivi erected a simple force shield, then greedily topped his mana off with a purple star. "As I was saying," Shortbus continued, gathering up the remaining corpses and throwing them over the wall, "there are big differences between people. I can see the best people, like Ben, good people, like Vivi and Ghost Ears, difficult people, like you, and very, very bad people, like those gremlins out there. Their leaders are the worst kind of people, and to me they stand out like a sore thumb. Could you be a deer and defend that pile of bodies for me?" Red was many things, but she wasn't ignorant of battle. There was only one reason to start throwing valuable corpses over the wall and tell her he was able to identify the gremlin leadership. "Vivi!" Red shouted. "On my mark, breach the wall right there!" she said, pointing a little bit to the right of where all the dead gremlins were now scattered. Vivi, who was more than happy that people were telling him what to do, nodded and prepared to follow orders. Red's eyes grew in intensity, her own internal reserve of power being fully committed to what she was about to do. They both flew towards the new path of attack, then merged into a single, very large eye. "Ben!" Shortbus said, sending his words telepathically. "Fall back! Ghost Ears as well, all of you. We're about to charge. Red's about to do something really nasty. I suggest you take cover in here." "Falling back," Ghost Ears said, and he and the fairy swarm immediately flew high, then dove to safety. Charge? Why? We're winning, Ben said, still in his excited predatory aggression mindset. He still fell back, though, leaping up to the trees, then down to the ground next to Short Bus. You're taller, Short Bus said, then slapped Ben's back, his arm just barely long enough to reach that low. Ben hopped up and slapped Short Bus's back, the action looking like special effects from a bad martial arts movie or a really awesome high school play. Vivi eyed Ben's new form, then rolled his impressively large eyes. You just can't be out-specialized, can you? What's next? You triple in size next week? Fuck, I hope so, Ben said, and Vivi frowned, then decided it wasn't worth pursuing. There is no time for this, Red said, and Ben and Vivi both immediately shared a look, the kind of look that requires no words or telepathic communication or anything fancy to transmit meaning. There's always time for this, Ben said, and Vivi nodded with his eyes. But also, yeah, no time. Red, who was still charging whatever attack she was about to inflict on the battlefield, felt her face scrunch in concentration, her knees going weak. She fell, but managed to maintain her focus. I'm ready, she gasped. Vivi, now, everybody shut your eyes! Say whatever you want about Ben's party, but they were fast learners. And when Red said, shut your eyes, they shut their eyes. If they hadn't, this is what they would have seen. The enormous eye, which was now a perfect sphere about 6 feet across in any direction, began to rapidly develop pupils, first doubling, then doubling again, then doubling again, and again, and again. The whole thing was teeming with eyes, like an amphibian's egg sac. There was a burst of light, and the eyes began to shift from color to color to color, and the very air of the battlefield started to warp and twist with toxic, poisonous color. For the gremlins not smart enough to shut their eyes, the consequence was that their brains shuddered for a moment before giving way to the mother of all migraines, and their entire nervous system feeling as though it needed to vomit. It was a bit like the eye sphere was a large chunk of visually radioactive material, and anyone who looked at it had their brains irradiated. The effect continued for 3 seconds, the eye sphere rapidly contracting in size, shrinking until it expended its stored energy. Red fell over, her body's energy spent, and her 2 dim, dull, insubstantial eyes weakly flew over and nestled themselves in their protective cages of horn. The battlefield had sound, yet seemed silent. Gremlins screamed in pain, but their screams were weak, pathetic sounds. The silence, then, didn't come from the gremlins, but from the forest around them. Whatever Red had done seemed to have caught the attention of every living thing in the area, including all the things summoned from the beyond, as well as all the regular monsters of the over-cavern forest. Ben heard a howl, but not a wolf's howl. It was something the size of a wolf, but with the chittering, whistling scream of an insect. Then he heard a different sound, a loud hissing click, clearly from a different kind of creature. After that, there was a sound like the fluttering of insect wings, the rapid buzz, the quickness of it distinctly insectile. But all of that was dwarfed by something else. A presence had come over the battlefield, a looming gaze that had always been there, a presence which had been asleep but slept no longer. Ben, Short Bus, Vivi, and Ghost Ears all looked up at the same time. The bladed slayer's eyes were open, fixed on the spot where Red's attack had been. It was watching the world, taking in the sights. If Ben or Red or Ghost Ears hadn't been so distracted, they would have noticed the cabal of elder gremlins behind the giant tree the bladed slayer's cyst was attached to. They would have noticed the eldest gremlin utilizing another soul stone. Not as vaunted and powerful as a quasar soul, no, but nonetheless powerful enough to give life to their monstrous creation. They would have then noticed the eldest wearily running away with a small group of lesser gremlins, ordering them to carry him to safety and to die to protect his life. But none of Ben's party saw that happen. They'd been too distracted by the battle, which was in and of itself just a gigantic diversion tactic. The chorus of giant insects started up again, and the sight of what was coming towards all the death and carnage the fight had generated would give most modern humans a fright at a minimum and a permanent psychological scar at a maximum, depending on how freaked out they were by organized packs of giant scorpions that acted like wolves and a swarm of human-sized mantis monsters that acted like a pack of lions. Or how terrifying they would find an enormous solitary fly with razor-sharp whipping antennae, whose hairy legs were like sharp razor wire, and a mouth which could bite a regular-sized human in half. Oh, there were a lot of monsters in the Overcavern Forest, and almost all of them were giant bugs. That's what made it so famous and so dreaded. The spiders that were coming at them, not even worth describing. They were terrifying, though, I can assure you of that. The kind of thing that a single glance of would turn your skin to rigid goosebumps that won't go away for days kind of terrifying. Ben's party was, in 2 words, completely fucked. Most of these monsters would not be hindered in any way by a wall or uneven terrain. Then there was the fact that the army of night fiends had decided that enough was enough and now was the time to burst forth to the surface world. Their first ranks poked their heads out of the hole, saw the endless horrors of the surface, and then retreated. Probably best to wait a few hours and fortify their position underground in case the surface decided to invade them. Anna, the teenage sunlet, the female statue of beautiful orange crystal, realized she might be in way over her head and rushed towards the fortified position of Ben's party, bringing her group with her. "Don't attack!" she shouted, effortlessly clearing the wall with a jump, followed by the robot and the elemental. "We're here to help." The system custodian effortlessly floated over the obstacle, then quickly latched its attention onto Vivi. "Greetings, Vivi," it said, its voice male and pleasant. "I am here on behalf of the system." A soft pop interrupted the system custodian. Frankie had finally finished modifying the pocket of sanctuary to his satisfaction and wasted no time transporting it to Ben's position. A black oval ringed by purple appeared, and all hell broke loose as the monsters attacked. The bladed slayer cut his embryonic wall easily, and glowing orange fluid spilled everywhere like a tide, soaking the battlefield with the stinking water of its birth. It stepped forward in shaking, unsteady legs, the ground trembling from its massive size, then righted itself. The insects didn't care at all. They were bugs and didn't have a survival instinct. They immediately attacked this new monster, and the bladed slayer attacked back, stomping and cutting, killing without hesitation. Ben hopped up to get a look, barely avoided getting grabbed by the giant demonic fly, felt all the blood drain from his body in terror, and landed. "Retreat!" he shouted. "Retreat! Into the pocket now!" "No," Red croaked out, her dim eyes locked onto the retreating eldest gremlin. With the last of her strength, a light shot fast as a bullet from both of her eyes and impacted the eldest gremlin with no apparent effect. Red watched the attack hit the gremlin, then collapsed. Shortbus and Vivi grabbed the immobile Red and dragged her in. Ghost Ears, along with the fairy swarm, then rushed in. Ben looked at the newcomers. Anna, the sunlet. BRX-031, the cyborg. Drist La La La, the music elemental. "Betray us and we'll fucking kill you. Follow me, you'll be safe in here," Ben growled, his crown instantly heating to near incandescence, like a light bulb's filament when the switch was flipped. All the power of his quasar soul pouring through it for just a moment. The crown nearly cracked, and its durability plummeted, but it didn't break. Then Ben rushed into the pocket of sanctuary. The system custodian followed after, calmly calling for Vivi. Drist coughed, an entirely unnecessary noise from a being of elemental energy, a learned noise that allowed him to communicate with regular creatures. "I think we should put the mission on hold," the music elemental said, then rushed to safety. "Agreed," 31 said, then flew as fast as he could into the portal. Anna looked around, spat some burning spit, then walked forward towards the portal. "This is some fucking bullshit is what this is. I'm going to kill Dryden, that fucking asshole. Easy mission, what a fucking liar," she said, then crossed the threshold. A moment passed, and then, unknown to everyone inside the pocket of sanctuary, the second most dangerous combatant entered the fight. Frankie was obviously playing the playful, helpful host to Ben and his friends. He rolled around and played and delighted the visitors while his minions piloted the deadly skill. The portal's purple tentacles merged into 6 solid mechanical legs of purple light, spread equidistant from one another. The pocket walked in a few directions a bit experimentally, then started to climb over the ring of stone. The remaining purple tentacles merged into a few arms. The now large and long tentacles floated about aimlessly for a moment as the pocket made its slow way over the wall. The pocket of sanctuary hopped and landed heavily. The legs buckled, then righted themselves. An insect charged blindly at it, and a tentacle shot out like the tongue of a frog, grabbed the bug, and then stuffed it through the entrance. There was a short moment of pause, like 2 utility pocket elementals were adjusting a few things, and then all hell really broke loose, and the tentacles started to attack all at once, grabbing everything within reach. The bladed slayer, all rage and hatred, shrieked at the pocket of sanctuary and charged at it. The pocket hung from the side of its tree, its limbs and tentacles growing visibly brighter as it gathered the thick mana pouring from the underground. The slayer charged, and the pocket jumped. Its entrance widened and widened as it fell. The slayer was half swallowed in a single bite, and then the utility pocket seized up, frozen. All of its mana expended as it dealt with the extremely tough bladed slayer. It was vulnerable, though none of the gremlins knew that, nor any of the more intelligent insects. The utility pocket spat the bladed slayer out, and the bladed slayer fled, looking like something had been bashing its head against a wall at high speed. The pocket of sanctuary sat fallen over on the ground, frozen in place, open to invasion for any brave enough to approach. None were. The thick, powerful mana in the air was drawn in by the pocket of sanctuary's greater mana siphon, and refined by its greater mana furnace, and slowly its tentacles began to thrash again. It righted itself, and without ceremony, continued its assault. Chapter 20. In the College of Eternal Life, in the capital city of Exitus, in the island nation of Kingsland, the nation of the Inalim, a congregation of well-maintained, well-groomed liches stood around a jar of plasma. Not lightning or fire, mind you, but plasma. Exactly like the kind found in human blood. It was, in fact, human plasma. "Remarkable," the dean said, the blue fire in his eye sockets flaring with emotion. His undead gaze shifted from the first jar, then to the second, which held a living green gel. A jelly, an evolutionary cousin of the slime. Not the common kind of jelly one would find out in the field, I might add. This was a special domestic variety. The kind only high-leveled ranchers could manage, and only when they had a special license from their host nation. "I could scarcely believe it when I read your paper on the subject," the dean continued, taking his eyes off the 2 jars and looking at his colleges. 2 other liches, a single techno-lich and an extremely old man in scholar's robes leaning heavily on a wooden walking stick, were examining the specimens. The old man wheezed and gave a weak smile to the dean. "It was just as surprising to me, I assure you of that," he wheezed, then began hacking violently. Blood was mixed with the saliva, and the assembled liches leaned in with eager, approving looks on their faces. The old man recovered, and one of the liches gave him a sympathetic, gentle pat on the back. "Any day now, Trellius," a regular lich said. "We can hardly believe you've held on this long. Just get it over with already." The old man shot the lich a dirty look, and the assembled undead chuckled. "You know as well as I," Trellius said, "why I must endure." "I'm only joking," the lich said. "It is admirable you spend your final days in research." "They are not my final days. I will naturally, after my death, take a 6-month leave of absence, but I will be returning shortly after that." A young man entered the room with a glass case, a set of human shin bones on display. "My final days. So long ago, yet so clearly remembered," the dean said, then indicated the young living scholar to place the case next to the sample of human plasma. "I spent them with my grandchildren, I believe." "Reckless," Trellius said. "Very reckless, unless you had a ritual hall set up in your home." "Naturally," the dean said. "Wasteful, then," Trellius said, and the assembled undead laughed again. "I think he's nervous it won't work," the techno-lich said. His undead body seamlessly merged with technology. "I have every confidence in our necromancers and in my own ability," Trellius said, growing a bit red in the face, then devolving into another fit of coughs. He really seemed to be forcing them, like he was intentionally trying to overstrain himself. "Oh, don't do that," the dean said. His head leaned back as he laughed. No, Trellius. You must die naturally." His laugh was dry but genuine. "I did the same thing in my last week," another lich said, and the undead began to howl with laughter. Trellius gave them all a baleful glare. "Your discomfort will soon end, trust me. You should savor the pain and the frailty of life while it is still yours. It ends. And this," the dean said, indicating his own undead form, "is forever." "I think he was pointing to his robes," the techno-lich said. "He thinks he'll be dean forever, the arrogance," another lich said in jest, and there was chuckling all around, including from Trellius. Quite enough," the old dying man said, sounding a bit cheered. "You're all here because of my conclusions after the autopsies of the dead humans in our lands. First, a bit of history. The slime." The dead were, as a general rule, never bored, but they all knew about the slime. It was a well-studied monster, but they respected their colleague enough to listen. "As you all well know, the slime is one of the most morphologically diverse organisms in the world. This is owed in part to its low intelligence and its asexual and sexual reproductive abilities. Its slime, however, is the real reason it is valued. Slimes and their subspecies are specialized organisms, and their specialization is mana retention." Nods all around. These were all professors in the College of Eternal Life, and Trellius wasn't breaking any new ground here. "The slime can be processed in any number of ways, and I will not waste my final breaths listing them. The grade varies from species to species, and typically the higher the grade, the more difficult the slime is to deal with. This," he said, and held up the jar of green gel, "and this," he held up the jar of human plasma, "are nearly equal in their ability to retain mana." "And the bones?" "Similarly graded. The human corpse is useful in every way. There is nothing inside of them below the B grade. Further, each of them possess a quasar-class soul. Ponder that.
and the sudden glut of cheap, powerful souls on the market makes complete sense.
Your paper mentioned their disposition and reproduction, but never specified. Are you suggesting what I believe you are? Further, are the rumors that they are magical true? I read the newsletter, the same as all of us, but still I can scarcely believe it,
the dean stated, and the assembled liches nodded. It was why they were here, after all.
They are magical, yes.
I always thought that was a sunlit exclusive ability,
Trellius said.
So did I, but it isn't so. Apparently, it was originally created by humans during the time of the Primordial War, when they were exiled to the world the first time.
And their recovery time?
Months.
By the grave, what a remarkable organism. Your suggestion, Trellius?
They are intelligent, agreeable, and reproduce like goblins,
Trellius said, and laughed a laugh which was nearly wicked.
In other words, gentlemen, they are the perfect species to be farmed.
The liches pondered it.
I have heard reports that humans transform when they activate their levels. Fairies, remarkable. Their value cannot be overstated.
Indeed, Trellius said. I propose we offer the humans the same corpse contracts we offer our own citizens. Abyss, why stop there? Let's offer them full citizenship in Kingsland immediately. They will love the kindergarten.
I will bring it before the Eternal Assembly at once, the dean said seriously, and then stood. Trellius, you are going to be a fine lich. I will be personally overseeing your transformation,
the dean said, then patted the living man on the shoulder with a bony hand.
A fine lich,
the techno-lich said, and patted him as well. The other scholars and professors repeated the process. Kingsland, home of the Inalim, a nation of necromancy and undead. The citizens live a life of plenty, supported by the undead, and when they die, their contribution to the nation begins. Every adventurer's guild in the world has a booth with an Inalim representative behind it, a man who will promise a monthly payout in exchange for a corpse contract. Most adventurers took them as well, because all they had to do was submit to a yearly physical and keep their bodies in good shape. When they died, their bodies were taken by Kingsland and resurrected, and the corpse contract began paying for itself. The living were ruled by a king, and the dead were ruled by the college. Two nations, one on top of the other. A land where the dead served the living and the living served the dead. That day an edict was put forth which would shake the world. From this day forth, the illegal poaching of the human species shall be met with an official censure of the College of Eternal Life and a full trade embargo with the nations in which these crimes are perpetrated. All human beings are hereby offered full citizenship to the nation of Kingsland, with all benefits and responsibilities that entails. It was the way the dead men who dreamed they ruled the world liked things. Short, to the point, and inconvenient for their enemies. Chapter 21. Congratulations again, Vivi, the system custodian said in his pleasant, inhuman, intelligent voice. You have truly set a record which I dare say none will ever beat. Vivi laughed politely, the way a cornered mouse would if a lion were chatting it up. The system custodians, I might note, all constantly exude a skill called pleasant aura. Its effects are rather obvious. There's already speculation you will reach your second maturity before you are 500. Imagine that. You could be the most famous Aeon slug in your species' history. Vivi politely laughed again, and eyed the box which the system custodian had yet to hand over, then looked at the party hat. Then he looked at Ben, and got a sly look on his face.
Could you make it mandatory that everybody needs to wear one of those?
While that was going on, Ben was looking at two naked women with a sense of resignation that nobody in this world was ever going to put on any clothes. Red and Anna were sizing each other up like a leopard and a jaguar crossing paths might, and then granting a catty kind of disregard, which was as close to respect as cats got. Then he looked down, saw that he'd been running, at attention for a while, and politely excused himself to go find something to wrap around his waist. Like anything. So he rushed over to the now upgraded dungeon crystal floating in the back and started fiddling around with its complicated menu system. Frankie was delighting everyone, jumping through portals from one group to the next. He was considerably faster and more energetic since his advancement from minor elemental to lesser. Currently, he was making Anna shriek in delight as he plopped right into her arms and looked at her with his eyeless, faceless face. Little dude still managed to make it cute. Short Bus was carrying on an absolutely fascinating psychic conversation with BRX-031, who went by 31.
So, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Short Bus asked telepathically.
An interesting way to frame it,
31 said, projecting feelings of enjoying himself. In this case, the egg was a robotic AI shell, and the chicken was created by the egg, and the chicken is my specially grown organic brain. We're all followers of the dwarven religion, and as such have merged with biological life to the greatest extent practical.
So you grew your brain last?
It, or I, the distinction is subtle and debatable, was specifically grown to interact with my particular robotic configuration.
That's wild,
Short Bus said, his eyes glazing over as he thought about it for a little bit. Isn't it? Say, if we get back to Solas, would you like to get a drink? I know a great bar.
Would I?
Short Bus practically shouted, and he gently and awkwardly slapped 31 on his... Short Bus wasn't sure if the cyborg actually had a back. 31 laughed and slapped Short Bus gently on the back with one of his sick-ass machine tentacles. A little bit away, Ghost Ears and Drist La La La, who went by Drist, were conversing in a more serious manner.
How do you stand it? Nobody is wearing anything,
Drist asked.
I'm honestly having trouble figuring out how I got myself in this situation,
Ghost Ears said, his face suggesting that it was really just now hitting him that he had no clue what was going on anymore.
Also, just exactly what are we inside of right now? I have the uncomfortable sensation of being in another elemental's domain, but the only one I see around is that little, lesser... I'm not familiar with exactly what that is.
Oh, that's Frankie, Ghost Ear said, completely dodging the question or misunderstanding it. Give the guy a break. He's had a really, really long week. Frankie looked up from squirming around in Anna's arms, who was absolutely loving it, by the way, and locked eye contact with Drist. By all rights and powers, Drist should have been able to utilize his considerably higher position in the elemental hierarchy to cow Frankie into submission. That's not what happened. Instead, Frankie made an "I'm watching you" gesture with his little stubby arms. Drist felt the shadow of death brush over him as the pocket of sanctuary evaluated him as a threat, and then Frankie went back to wiggling his little legs at Anna. Frankie was just loving the attention. Red, for her part, kept mumbling to herself about how she didn't know what was going on, and her hands kept twitching towards Frankie, like she didn't know that she really wanted to cuddle the smooshy little dude. Anna, though self-absorbed and teenaged, was female, and graciously shared the cuteness. Frankie plopped into Red's arms. Her energetic eyes dilated a little bit, and she started hugging the little guy, saying things that, for her sense of dignity, I won't repeat. She did squeal a little bit. That was funny. The system custodian had finished making little party hats for everyone and was passing them out with Vivi. Ben was still frantically trying to find out where he could buy a pair of pants in the pocket of Sanctuary's store, and was seriously considering blowing a huge chunk of their points to buy a trivial wish so he could wish for some boxers and jeans. And socks. And shoes. And a shirt. It was as Ben was considering spending the points that he realized they had the points to spend. Ben's eyes went wide, and he realized the pocket of Sanctuary was bringing in the money. Holy shit, Ben whispered, looking at the number and then looking at their guests and suppressing an urge to kick them out. They were close, very close, to being able to afford their map of wish. Ben frowned, then looked over at the entrance, which was suspiciously clouded over. Ben started digging through the menu and looking at the upgrades that had already been bought. Shield 5, Segregated Kill Zone 5, Mana Efficiency 10, Mana Processing 10, Custom Modification. Ben noted with some suspicion, but no desire to know more, that the actual shop history had been set to hidden. What had Frankie been buying? Ben had no idea, but he trusted the little guy, so why worry? Ben felt something seize up in his chest when he saw a store tab labeled Crowns, and did something he both hated and was proud of himself for. Ben shouted, "I need an adult!" And then Short Bus and Ghost Ears came over to drag him away from the dungeon crystal, lest he be overcome by royal madness and spend all their money. He was later somewhat mollified by the system custodian, giving him a cool little party hat that had a crown printed on its paper surface. Everybody got a custom party hat, actually. Ghost Ears' hat had fake ears, which he and everybody else just thought was super funny. Short Bus had shark print. Red's had a bunch of eyes on it. Anna said bad bitch, and she was wearing it proudly. Drist's hat fit exactly over his cone-shaped top and had music notes on it. 31's hat had a picture of a party hat on it, which had a picture of a party hat on it, which had a picture of a party hat on it, etc., etc. Very recursive, and the cyborg liked it. Everybody was having a good time, and pointedly, nobody was willing to derail the good time until the system custodian had completed his task and left. "Vivi," the custodian said, and everybody was assembled to watch. "In honor of your record-breaking achievement, the system has determined that a gift was in order. Feel honored, and know that your accomplishment has been recorded and will be remembered for as long as the system endures." Then the system custodian opened the little white box, and a blinding flash of light shone out, like a huge amount of energy had been released. "Pardon that. Those were the ward deactivating. Please, wear this ribbon of accomplishment with pride." The system custodian pulled out a small red ribbon, like the kind given out at a county fair for best hog or prettiest cow, stuck it to Vivi's side, said congratulations, and left the room. The ribbon said, "Good job." No exclamation point. Ben saw it all happen. He was there, in that moment, and in that moment, he reached his limit. "This shit is so surreal," he said, and sank to his knees, clutching his head and realizing he was covered in blood. He also realized he'd been in the world for like 3 days now, and suddenly some part of his brain that hadn't been convinced woke up and realized none of this was a fucking dream. Everyone else, similarly, also underwent an emotional shift. Now that the system custodian and his pleasant aura were gone, mental reality reasserted itself. Ghost Ears was the first to throw off his party hat, but he was also the only one to stomp on his. Apparently the fake ears weren't so funny when he wasn't being mind-controlled. Ben kept his hat on, but only because it didn't obstruct his crown. Of all of them, Ben felt the least bothered by having his mind influenced in such a way, mostly because he was already used to the oftentimes clumsy, yet always present presence of his class on his brain. "Right," he said, clapping his now toddler-sized hands with adult-sized force. "We're breaking out of here. Ideas? Frankie, please show us a view of the situation." Frankie, much to the displeasure of Anna, portaled right out of her arms and in front of Ben and gave him a salute with one of his legs. "Yeah, what the fuck? I wasn't done," Anna muttered, then kicked the ground a little. The exit, which had previously been clouded over, unclouded, and the party was greeted by the sight of multiple gremlins being stuffed through the entrance. Frankie apparently also interpreted "show us a view of the situation" to include audio because he unmuted the unmistakable sounds of monsters being repeatedly launched at a hard surface until dead. Anna's party, who had been fairly relaxed, suddenly tightened up. Anna's eyes were moving back and forth, like she was reading something, and then her eyes widened. She coughed and looked around.
"Which one of you is, Ben? Prince? Oh, that one," she said, looking at Ben and seeing the crown. Obvious. "Hello," she said, her voice suddenly all kinds of fake polite. "Your Majesty, but you are the owner of this trick dungeon, right?" "No, wow, holy shit," Ben said, not really paying attention to them so much as the now unobstructed view of monstrous insects being grabbed. The utility pocket was clinging perpendicular to a tree trunk, just straight out horizontal with its mechanical legs. It was currently demolishing a swarm of giant mantis creatures 2 or 3 at a time by simply grabbing them and stuffing them into a bottomless stomach. "He is," Ben said, pointing his thumb to Frankie, who was sitting at his side also watching the carnage while occasionally looking at Ben to check his reaction. "Okay," Anna said, her voice still high and fake sweet. "I'm sorry. Did you say you're—" She shifted conversational targets without pause or interruption. "Drist, what is he?" "Minor," Drist, the higher music elemental, said. "Yes," she said, then immediately shifted back to Ben. "Your minor elemental is the owner of this dungeon? Where did you find him?" "Oh, didn't find him," Ben said, reaching into his own utility pocket and eating a handful of room-temperature fish meat raw. Ben was doing it like how people ate popcorn, and he just kept doing it. It was both disgusting and impolite, which was what Ben wanted to project to the naked orange crystal female interloper and her group. "What?" Anna asked, her already paper-thin facade of deference cracking. "No, I used one of those fucking wands. What were they called?" Ben said quickly, snapping his fingers. Frankie spat a wand of Create Lesser Elemental at Ben, who caught it. "Hey, yeah, one of these. Nice work, buddy," Ben said, then tossed the wand like a stick. Frankie waited till it was about to hit the ground, then caught it with a utility pocket of his own. He then retrieved it and made it sit on his knot face like he was holding it in his mouth. "Nice catch," Ben said, and ruffled Frankie's head. Anna's face literally could not be more disbelieving. Like all the character creation sliders were maxed out could not be any more calling bullshit than what it looked like. First of all, her orange crystal body would seem, from its description, like it should have major contrast problems, right? Like if you were trying to read her face, it would be like reading light gray font on a white sheet of paper. Possible, but caused eye strain. Not so. Her facial expressions were plain and clearly broadcasted. It had something to do with her various layers of translucency and the variation of colors from light to dark, but Ben didn't know enough about color theory to explain it even to himself. It just worked. Her eyes were wide open, wider than a human would be able to. Her eyebrows were up, but one was up a little farther than the other. Her nostrils were flared, and her nose was a little scrunched. Her mouth was
a just slightly open frown. Her head was tilted forward just a little bit.
"From a wand of create lesser elemental?"
she said, and didn't even bother to capitalize the name in her speech. "Yeah, those things are crazy overpowered," Ben said, eyes still on the action.
"No, they're not,"
Anna said, blinking and realizing,
"Holy fucking stars, he really thinks he got that elemental from a wand."
Then continuing,
"They're for parties, like social parties. They're a children's toy."
That got Ben's attention. "Excuse me?"
"Yeah, like you point it at a cake and make a lesser cake elemental and it flies around for a bit being silly."
Cake elemental? How on earth would you keep something like that alive? You need a significant source of its element. That would be what? A house-sized cake?
You don't, Ben. You don't keep it alive. It just fades away after the party, like a really long-lived firework."
"I don't think this is the appropriate time for this," 31 said, tapping Anna on the shoulder with a metal-tipped tentacle, the sound a clinky-tink. But it was too late. Ben had already dropped his handful of raw fish on the ground. It landed with a splat. He looked at Anna, really looked at her, and blinked several times. Ben's face underwent a transformation. His mouth opened slightly, then his eyebrows started to climb, quickly followed by his eyes widening. Then his brow furrowed just slightly, and his eyes displayed pure outrage, his nose scrunched, his mouth halfway to being wide open. Then, quick as a flash, he reset to calm. He turned away and continued to watch the entrance of the pocket of sanctuary, half-heartedly pretending things were still normal. "Oh, I see," he said. Frankie was not so good at hiding the emotions he felt through his soul link with Ben. The same soul link which would be created between anyone who used a wand of create lesser elemental and what was created. Frankie also felt some outrage of his own. The top of his back began to ripple and spike, like ferrofluid under the effect of a magnetic field. The long, blunt spikes were closely clustered together and rushed from his front to his back, vanishing from the back and being created in the front. Frankie hissed at them, and they felt the shadow of the Reaper as just for a moment the pocket of sanctuary considered if they were allies or not. "Smooth," Drist hissed at Anna, who gulped and wisely kept her mouth shut. "Any ideas, anyone?" Ben asked, tearing his eyes away from the view of monsters being destroyed and looking at his team.
"How long until the pocket expires?"
Vivi inquired.
"Because I vote we sit in here until it runs out and then run as far and as fast as we possibly can away from whatever's left."
Ben checked the timer. "A little under 9 hours left," Ben said, then sagged a little when he realized it had only been 3 hours since this all started.
"Perfect,"
Vivi said.
"Let's bunker down."
Ben thought he would feel something like indignation, or even a sense of cowardice. Instead, he shrugged his shoulders, looked around, then shrugged them again. "All in favor?" he asked, loud enough to be talking to everyone. Everyone raised their hands. Ben also raised his hand. His crown noticeably cooled. Apparently, princes didn't often put things to a vote. "All right, we sit down and wait. Frankie, is there any way to make this place a little more comfortable?" Frankie looked at Ben, and Ben got the oddest sense Frankie was using their soul bond to rifle through his memories. Because that was exactly what Frankie was doing. Ben got a notification that points had been spent from the dungeon crystal, and suddenly a bunch of furniture he never thought he was going to see again rose from the floor. His old couch. His old dining room table with his old chairs. His old computer desk with the computer. His old rugs. But not the carpet his old apartment had. "Oh my God," Ben said, walking towards the dresser that contained his photo album, the one that had all the pictures of his family. He walked right past the dresser and right up to his dirty clothes hamper. It was full of actual clothes. Jeans, shirts, socks, boxers. everything. Ben fell to his knees and hugged it. He grabbed an old pair of jeans, one that didn't smell too bad, and hugged them. Then, going commando, Ben tried to put them on. He succeeded, but the full length of the pants was about as long as his entire body and just ended up looking fucking ridiculous. "Damn it!" Ben shouted, and started kicking his old clothes and scattering them everywhere. "Damn it, damn it, damn it! Fucking bullshit, goddamn leprechaun piece of shit, you fucking asshole of a system!" Ben was punching a pile of work shirts, which were bright construction orange with silver retro-reflective strips across them for safety reasons. Ghost Ears came over and patted Ben on the shoulder. He gave Ben a wise, sympathetic expression. "You want to talk about it, buddy?" "Fuck off!" Chapter 22. Ben wished he'd never seen his old stuff again. It was all laid out exactly how he had left it, cleaned and ready to sit unused for a month, possibly 2 months, depending on how his vacation went. He had requested some privacy, and it was in a jarring amalgamation of his old room and the dark void of the pocket of sanctuary. All of his furniture, but none of the floor and walls and ceiling. All his stuff was here, but here wasn't his apartment. Seeing it all, the sheer mundane reality of his old possessions, was a weight heavier than anything Ben had experienced thus far. It was, he felt, almost a mockery. Like he wasn't in a fantasy world, like nothing had changed, while everything so obviously had. He'd walked with a being from the Pure Lands and watched her die. He'd known her for 20 minutes, possibly less, but he'd known her, seen her personality, felt who she was, and what a crime it was that she'd been stolen from her home. There was an ache in his chest he couldn't shake. He had been changed. He had a stray thought. He wondered if his parents and Betsy had ended up in the same place, wherever it was that good people went after they died. "Fuck!" Ben thought, clamping down hard on his mind, banishing the emotionally upsetting thought away from him. It worked, and soon he was calm again. He was laid out on his old bed. The squeaky spring mattress had never seemed larger. He stared up at the black void of a ceiling, and the action of being in his bed and staring up at the ceiling connected him to his own and old life in a profound, powerful way. Like a lightning strike in his brain, without the flash or the noise, just the surge of potential energy equalizing. 2 lives, one brief and one far too long, meeting and realizing they were the same person. "It's just me," Ben said, a frown on his face. He lifted his hand, which wasn't his hand anymore. His hand's fingers had ranged from 2 to 3 inches, and this hand's longest finger could generously be called 1.5 inches. "I'm still just the same person I always was," he said, his voice quiet. He turned to his side, then turned back to lay on his back. It was a familiar action, one he did nearly every night of his life. He felt fear, because he was somewhere safe. Ben was terrified of the monsters he'd seen out there, and even more terrified of the monsters he hadn't seen. He looked at his hands again, and vivid memories surged of what he'd done to gremlins and fairies and turret snails and axe beetles. "I've never been so violent in my life," he whispered, feeling a strange mix of emotions. A thrill of excitement, a surge of sorrow, a dash of disgust, lightly seasoned with the sense of undeniable superiority that comes from having killed and not having been killed yourself. He felt the crown talking to him, trying to contextualize his motions in such a way that he would relish in the superiority, that he would seek more powerful creatures to kill so that his power would be evident to everyone. Was it just the crown, Ben wondered? Or was it something inside of him as well? He had often considered the grim reality of human beings, of how often they, as a species, killed. For food, for sport, for love, for hate, for duty, for God, for the devil, for any reason at all. Humans had been killing since before they were even a species. Ben's father had been to war, and his grandfather, and his great-great-grandfather. Every war in America had one of Ben's ancestors in it, and probably every war in pre-colonial Europe as well. Ben had spent years thinking about that on and off. Had his ancestors all been good people? He doubted it. They'd all been to war, and war was an ugly thing where good men did demonic things to other good men and inflicted wickedness on the losers. Nobody was innocent of the stain on their bloodline. All nations and all peoples of the earth were descended from violent killers, rapists, and monsters. And heroes as well. That was the mystery that sometimes haunted Ben when he lay in bed. In the war, in hell, some men were still good men. Some men still laid down their lives to selflessly save another. Some stood against the monsters rather than become one themselves. And now here I am, with blood on my hands, Ben whispered without emotion. But that's the wrong way to say it, isn't it? Ben wasn't without emotion, but simply beyond it for the moment. His feelings were there, but they were under him, like hot asphalt making an updraft for a bird of prey to circle higher and higher. What to do? He was a killer now, too, despite his best efforts in life. He'd stayed out of the military specifically for that reason. Just so there would be one generation of his family male line without blood on their hands. What a fiction that had turned out to be. What a ludicrous notion. None had ever done such a thing, and none ever would. Ben couldn't tell if that last thought had come from the crown or himself. It scared him that he didn't want to know. The modern world had made it so easy to forget, and had even gone so far as to actively try and forget what life really was, what it had been. That safety and comfort were fragile illusions maintained by the careful daily labor of tens of millions. Ben had been one of those tens of millions. He'd never told anyone before. But before he worked for the city, he had no idea how sidewalks were even made. If someone had asked him, he would have stated, "They pour concrete," and said it was simple. Then he'd actually done it. A lot. He realized how fucking stupid and ignorant he really was about the world around him. After that, he poured sidewalks and roads in concrete. He'd made new roads out of tar and pebbles and sand. That shit modern people call asphalt. He'd picked up garbage and cut the grass. He'd cleaned up after the homeless when they died in the woods, or when their shanty towns in the woods were discovered. The more he'd done to contribute to the smooth operation of a modern city, the more he realized how fragile it all was and how quickly it could all fall apart. Constant, daily maintenance till the end of time. That was the price of civilization. Ben started laughing and blinked a couple of times. God, that's so fucking nostalgic, he said, sitting up. Laying in bed, raging against the modern world for all its fucked up stupidity. Ben started laughing in earnest. The blood on his hands not forgotten, nor forgiven, nor resolved. It was simply there. And all Ben could do was try and be a good person in spite of it. He could spend his life racked with guilt over his own evil nature and the evil natures of his all-too-human ancestors. Some people did, and it didn't get them very far, and it didn't wash off the blood. Nothing ever would. The human soul is stained deep crimson with the blood of the innocent and the damned, and all a man can hope for is that more wickedness dies than innocence lost. I'm so fucking self-righteous, Ben said, trying to mock himself, and then getting an earful from his crown about how righteousness is determined by royalty. This is seriously the worst class ever, Ben said, and really considered for the first time taking the crown off and throwing it in a ditch somewhere. Ben was stronger than his class, and he could do it. He knew he could. He didn't. He couldn't say why, except that being a prince was a damn good bit of fun, and he couldn't think of anything else he would rather be. I think I'm actually pretty good at this whole prince thing. Then Ben got up out of bed and went to join with the rest of the group. You have advanced to level *error. Your level system has malfunctioned. Seek a sage, hacker. That's not good. Vivi was sitting by himself away from the group, struggling to breathe. Nothing was physically wrong with him. He wasn't injured. He was just remembering everything that had just happened to him. Ghost Ears, who had nearly 200 years of experience as a village chief, 200 years of experience in dealing with emotional issues and trauma, 200 years of experience in counseling young people in distress. Ghost Ears flew over to Vivi and asked him what was wrong. And Vivi started talking. He'd almost died. Not just once, but lots of times, all in the same horrible night, a night that wasn't even over yet. The last time he'd felt like this, it had also been night, the worst night of his life, the night it all fell apart, when his stupid friends had convinced him to be even stupider than they were. The night they'd spent months preparing for, the night they thought would mark the beginning of their lives, of their success. The night they would open the beyond and pull out a great wish, just like the system did. The night they'd all died, almost 30 years ago, as humans measure time, and Vivi had been banished while his mother and father wailed for their child, for the terrible sin they'd committed in creating him, for the sin in raising him improperly, for the loss of him. That had been the day he was abandoned by his species, when his name had been forever blackened in their history. 30 long years he'd spent living in that dungeon, in that tree in the over-cavern forest, working for the system, doing the little jobs that dungeon bosses did when nobody was trying to conquer them. Others had come before, but none of them had ever made it through the boss door. He'd engineered the dungeon to not have enough silver keys to both fight the boss and claim the treasure chests. The best part was, by the time someone realized the trick, they'd already used all their keys and gotten somewhere mediocre, system-generated treasure. He hadn't minded being alone. Vivi had kept his mind occupied by studying magic, which was his passion anyways, and more than once he'd thought, wow, being exiled and alone sure is convenient. He'd been lying to himself, obviously, but people lie to themselves because it works, not because it's wrong. The Aeon Slug had put it all behind him, and for a blessed 10 years he hadn't thought about the past at all, content to sit in the mana-rich environment of his dungeon and study the arcane. He bought the books from the system with the payments he received for being a model dungeon boss. Then he'd bought some furniture, creature comforts, and by the stars, he'd been comfortable in his little hole in the world. In a single day, his world of delusion and illusion had been ripped away from him. From a single job interview, from a single human. Vivi told Ghost Ears everything about their plans to take over Strangetown, about how Ben wanted to make Vivi a royal sage, about how Vivi felt hopeful for the future again, about how he felt like he'd made a friend even though they knew almost nothing about each other. Vivi had been talking. Then he stopped. "What is it?" Ghost Ears asked, an expert at knowing when to be silent and when to speak.
"Ben's only 29, Vivi said.
His eyes wide as that particular memory surfaced, of that vulnerable moment when Ben had lost his crown and the person inside of the class had been revealed. Ghost Ears' eyes went wide and the blood drained from his face.
"He's barely a child,"
Ghost Ears whispered. He looked over and saw Ben messing around with some dirty laundry, trying to figure out a way to make something usable out of it.
"I never would have guessed."
Ghost Ears stared at Ben, who had grabbed a towel and was staring at it in triumph. A fairy could easily live to be 1,000 years old. An Aeon slug would never die of age. Ghost Ears and Vivi were both fairly young for their species, but Vivi was nearly 70 and Ghost Ears close to 250.
"Not even 30,
Ghost Ears whispered again.
"I never would have guessed."
In that moment, Ghost Ears underwent a fundamental psychological shift in relation to Ben. Whereas before he'd seen an arrogant but powerful prince, now...
"What a prodigy,"
the true elf fairy said to himself. And then,
"He's going to need so much help."
Another pause.
"He's going to need someone experienced in dealing with people."
There was a final pause, the longest yet. And then...
"He needs a royal advisor."
And Ghost Ears knew what he needed to do. The gremlins were broken, but that really wasn't a big deal to them. Their biggest loss was 2 out of the 15 elder gremlins who had allied together. 13 remained, and they walked through the over-cavern forest, trailing behind their latest monstrous creation. The eldest gremlin scrubbed at his chest, trying to remove the mark Red had put on him. He knew it was a tracking ability of some kind, though if it did anything else was anyone's guess. His initial plan had been something of a failure, resulting only in the creation of the Bladed Slayer rather than the total destruction of reality. Really, if he were being generous with himself, he would say the entire event had been a massive gain. He'd been trying to grow a Bladed Slayer for a very, very long time. At least as long as humanity had been gone from the world. Now that humans were back, bringing with them easy-to-procure and process ingredients for creating his Summoner's Brew, he was able to get into touch with some old friends from the other side. They'd shared the secret of creating the Bladed Slayer and more. The eldest gremlin patted a slim notebook at his side, which carried helpful tips on how to create some truly horrific, abominable shit. He sighed, thinking of the materials required to create his new, vastly improved children. There was only one dungeon in the Overcavern Forest to get the mutagens he required, and it had recently become quite the pain in the ass to deal with. What with it transforming into a citadel and all.